With the NBA season officially now over, I figured it'd be a good time to go back and look at some data patterns throughout the season and the playoffs and see what we can learn from the trends going forward. But I should say this is not financial advice. I'm just a YouTube guy. All right, first we're going to look at Zion, and we're going to look at his market pulse. If you're not familiar with market pulse, basically in this app, it combines data from all of these different cards. There's actually like several pages worth of cards, different rookie cards, different parallels, variations. Most of them are all PSA 10. So it's kind of cumulative. It's a total data of all these different cards. Now we're going to start here at September 1st, 2023, which is a little bit before the beginning of the NBA season. And we're going to go all the way up to the current date of filming this, which is June 19th. We can see pretty stagnant leading up to the season, and pretty shortly after the season starts, we see a slow dip followed by a pretty immediate dip. And that rings true all the way up until the playoffs. One thing I want to point out though is this tiny little dip. So we see 47.1% there, the day before 50%. This little dip of about 3%, that's Zion's playoff performance right there. And that might feel small on a chart like this, but because we're factoring in so many different cards, it actually is more significant among certain cards like a Prism Silver or an Optic Holo. Overall though, not a lot of movement, and his prices have stayed pretty true to that down about 50% range. I think we're at the current floor of Zion. I don't expect it to change a lot between now and the beginning of the season. In my opinion, Zion's a possible buy right now. I'd say 7 out of 10. A lot of people, I think, want to move on from their Zion cards. They want to move into other things. They may have been holding them for a while, waiting for that kind of big Anthony Edwards moment. Okay, let's look at LeBron James next. So starting in September, a steady trend down. In fact, he never breaks that kind of September price. All the way until we reach into the playoffs here in April, down about 15%, which is not huge, but it's significant. LeBron obviously is a GOAT candidate. He isn't getting any younger, so it's hard to say when exactly is the best time to sell LeBron if you buy him. However, for him, I'm actually going to change this date range. So I'm actually going to go back and show you a year further for his cards. September of last year. Check this out. Even a further dip. As we started at a fairly even place here in September, we're down 15% from this year, but another 15 from the year before, so overall down 30. I would say it's potentially a good time to get LeBron. I'm going to rate this a 6 out of 10 buy right now. I'd say it's possibly a good time. I mean, the data definitely shows his prices have cooled off. But how much further will they fall, especially as more and more young players take more and more attention in the league? And then when do you sell LeBron? All right, let's look at Jaylen Brunson, another hobby darling this playoffs. Now, he doesn't have like a market pulse here, so I've just pulled his PSA 10 and his PSA 9. So we see throughout the season pretty stagnant until we get to about February. You see this really high spike right here in May, the heat of the playoffs. Look at that, 191%, 200-something%. I mean, this is a huge bubble. Now, again, a market pulse was probably going to reflect this as more of a 30, 40, 50% bump, because these cards are often the first to fly off the shelves when someone gets hot, is the silver. Obviously, you can see after elimination, he's cooled off, still pretty high. Here's one thing I'd point out. It's a really tiny number, I don't know if you can see it. Pop count, 466 on the PSA 10, 664 on the PSA 9. That's not that high for a 2018 Prism Silver. So with Brunson, it may actually be a good move to try to find his cards raw if you can, and try and grade them if they're clean. And that gem rate is pretty decent. That's maybe 40% or so. So why not? Overall though, unless buying a raw card, I would not buy his slabs just yet. Okay, moving right along, we're gonna go to Giannis. So Giannis, another similar trend, straight down, 25% current to date, down from September of last year. And then we know what happens with the injuries and, you know, getting eliminated. It's cooled off. Looks like another about 5% or so. I'd say Giannis is 9 out of 10 right now. The team is still a contender-worthy team. Giannis is still fairly young. He's got multiple MVPs. I think we will see a resurgence in his prices in the near future. Okay, let's move on to SGA, or Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Now, here's one. We've seen a lot of them kind of going down from the start of the season. He's an example of someone who actually climbed throughout the season and into the playoffs. We see by October, he's up 20% by late October. A little bit of cool off down as we go through November and December. Once we get through the other side of the new year, all the way up to the playoffs, he's up a total of about 40% as we go into the playoffs. So it's a little up and down as he gets into the playoffs, but we see a general climb here as high as another 10%, 5 to 10% climb, I would say, throughout here. And then I want you to look at this little section here. So from the June 7th, 45%, to now. It's really in the last 10 days or so. We've seen about a 5% cool off. That to me is showing the start of a little decline. While SGA, I think he's a great player. I really only get to give him a 3 out of 10 purchase right now because I think this little thing from the last 2 weeks is going to start to continue on. And we'll see his prices continue to cool off. The one we've all been waiting for, Anthony Edwards. He also doesn't have a chart here on this app, but I'm just going to look at the PSA 10 and the PSA 9 of the silver, do a fair enough job for us. We see an absolute mountain peak throughout the playoffs here. Up as high as about 160%, which you'll notice is actually not as high as Jalen Brunson's, but it's still a big mountain nonetheless. Really fun player to watch through the playoffs. Look here, though, we've really cooled off. It's still up between 15 to 30% from back in September, but in my opinion, I think we're finding here a new floor for Anthony. And with all the hype and attention he's gotten, I don't think this is going to drop too much further. So I would, like, 8 out of 10 recommend buying right now. Okay, let's look at Luka, baby. Actually, Luka cooled off a bit throughout the season in terms of prices, not by a lot, but you see from like September to around the start of the playoffs, he's down almost 10%, maybe 5-8% or so. You see a pretty decent spike here on his card market, but actually it looks a lot bigger than it really is. You see that's only 11% to 11% here, so from top to bottom, that's a 22% swing. Followed by another 10% cool off. So this was a good selling opportunity for Luka. As for whether or not he's a good buy now, it's hard to say. I would say like 6 out of 10. Like, his prices are still high, but he is a very safe player to have. His history with his market has been fairly stagnant, but he's really young. And I would just say if you're looking to buy Luka, I wouldn't overpay. Now let's look at the one player that was the biggest surprise to me this year, and that's Jayson Tatum. Jayson Tatum just won his first NBA Finals, and yet his cards are down 10% from the beginning of the year. I made sure to wait like a day after the finals before filming this. We do see a little bit of it, like right here, like a kind of a 3% climb here with the finals. Little bubble here with the playoffs, but overall not a lot of action on Tatum's market. I don't really have a good understanding or reason why this is. The fact that Tatum's market is like this is super surprising to me, and it actually, for me, it makes him a possible buy. I would say 7 out of 10 on buying right now. I do think his prices will cool off a little bit, but they may actually even start to climb. It's hard to say, really. Okay, now we're gonna look at Jaylen Brown. I'm actually keeping Jayson Tatum here in this light blue line, and this dark blue will be Jaylen Brown. I wanted to look at both at the same time to try to get a gauge of what's going on here. We see overall pretty stagnant throughout the year, kind of a drop in Jaylen Brown. Honestly, with a drop that big, I think that's a little bit of an error in the data. I think, I could be wrong, but that's a pretty big drop for one day. But I digress. Going on, I wanted to point something out that I thought was kind of interesting. Around the time we see Tatum start to slip a few percentage points is kind of around the same time we see Brown increase a little bit. I don't know if those two things are correlated, but I do find it interesting. Maybe some potential Tatum buyers are shifting their energy to Jaylen Brown. Nonetheless, you see similar thing happens as Jaylen Brown's market gets hot. Tatum actually cools off, and I think this is because you have so many Celtics collectors, you have so many Celtics sports card collectors, and they have only so much money to spend, and a lot of the people who may have been buying Tatum are now buying Brown instead, and it's actually pushing Tatum's prices down. Overall, though, really interesting to see what happened to Jaylen Brown. Definitely a 0 out of 10 buy right now. His hobby moment has come, and I think it's okay. If you missed on Jaylen Brown, it is okay. So did I. That was a lot of data to look at. I appreciate you watching, getting to this point. I just want to summarize like 3 key things I learned just looking through all that data. I'd say number 1 is playoff performance spikes do happen. We've seen it happen with a number of players. It's really hard to predict who that's going to happen. But if you're holding cards at the playoffs, that's a great time to sell. Number 2, a lot of players dip during the mid-season. This is also due to football season happening around the same time. It kind of splits the sports card market in certain ways. So mid-season is actually a really good way to try to pick up and purchase some of these players. And 3, we saw it a little bit with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, but I think we could find other examples looking closer at the data of when other players start to spike and go up, it creates some other opportunities for other players. As money in the hobby is shifting toward one player, that money is now no longer going to some other players. So there could be some good buying opportunities for other players when a certain player spikes. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already and comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this video. Catch you next time.